to perhaps continue to pressure and motivate academics to do even more, even better, within the existing system that perhaps, I would argue, does not leave further room for such improvements. You know, the question I'm asking, have we reached that point where maybe something else has started to shift because people simply cannot do so much more at that level of excellence that we want them to do? So it is perhaps rather what we need to be thinking about is to explore what within the system has to change, within the way in which universities organize has to change in order to enable positive change and to revise structures, policies, and processes accordingly to enable this excellence. Now, needless to say, there may be multiple models for such redesign. And I think the challenge is for each place to look and see, you know, what are some of the ways in which we can really, in realistic ways, plan for continuing improvement. Now, sorry. Now, the one that I have recently championed in my role as Vice Provost at the university and which has eventually become implemented in practice grew out of the conclusion that we have collectively reached, that given the significantly expanded set of current demands, you know, if you think about the previous slides that I just showed you, this sort of jack of all trades or the one man orchestra, you know, a model of an academic may actually have outlived its time. You know, in other words, I would argue that with very notable exceptions, there may be simply no time and capacity in a single academic individual's life to contribute to both the teaching and research mission to the university at the level of excellence, okay, at the level of world-class excellence that we need to insist on today. Now, and this is a very important point that I need to make. I want to make it clear that this statement does not suggest absolving all professors from a personal strive for excellence in their daily classroom teaching, from careful consideration of student and peer feedback, and from ensuring regular updates to own courses to ensure that they reflect the cutting edge of knowledge within his or her discipline. Okay? So I'm not suggesting that because of this changing ways, the way in which we interact with students, regardless of, you know, what our appointment is, that we have an excuse to say, oh, well, you know, I shouldn't be doing this. It is rather to acknowledge that most world-class researchers will unlikely have the capacity to continue to invest in their research at the level commensurate with the world-class, you know, standing, and at the same time take on serious responsibility for things such as major undergraduate curriculum redesign, okay? Or for undergraduate student mentoring in very extensive ways, or for development of online resources that can support flexible learning. You know, in other words, put it the other way, those who assume such responsibilities, you know, who really invest in this educational leadership that I would argue universities today require, will likely be seriously disadvantaged in their ability to invest enough time and effort into research to position themselves among world leaders in their scholarly fields. You know, something's got to give. Now, these individuals, while remaining current in their fields and maintaining their respective research expertise, will require more time to also engage with the scholarship of teaching and learning in order to bring scholarly approaches to their teaching and mentor others in those approaches. So consequently, you know, realizing that sort of, you know, you can't add instruments to this, and that the quality of the tuba playing is not going to be the world-class excellence, you know, in this kind of model. We said, you know, perhaps something needs to change. So, so consequently, we have decided to structure the tenure track faculty complement in ways in which I would argue a balanced university may consider building its academic human resources along two parallel tenure track sort of faculty tracks. Now, as I mentioned before, you know, in a traditional university, we have one-size-fits-all faculty, right? Which I would argue that as we increase emphasis on research, teaching just has to give. You know, remember that scale with the broken arms? You know, there's just the capacity of systems or instruments beyond which it breaks down. So I would say it kind of becomes impossible. So what we've done, instead we decided to say, well, if we want to allow people to reach excellence, and we want the institution to reach excellence, world-class excellence in those different aspects of the mandate, the teaching and research, what we need to do, we need to structure differently the professoriate. So we still have, and most of our professors fall into the traditional professoriate, where research, teaching, you know, and service matter. But we created a parallel track which is focused on teaching and educational leadership priorities. You see, educational leadership is this critical piece that is required for world-class excellence in teaching and learning, which requires significant investment of time, effort, expertise. And we have charged a stream of faculty, also in a professorial stream now, where instead of expectations for research, there are expectations for educational leadership. Now, while there have certainly been significant cultural challenges to the implementation of this model, and growing pains in the development and application of the relevant policies and practices, this model has positioned the university to continue to strive for all of the things that we wanted to do, the world-class research excellence. We have not lost the capacity for it. But we also simultaneously have created the capacity for developing research-based, evidence-informed teaching and learning environments, allowing us to strive for teaching and learning excellence, and better balancing, in this new balancing metaphor, research and teaching and learning related missions. So, here it is. So let's go back to the responsibilities of the leadership. So this development that I just described, you know, creation of this restructuring the faculty complement, if you will, within the university, provides an example of how university leadership can, if you will, directly engage in the improvement of quality of teaching and learning, not just through trying to motivate faculty to do better and, you know, and pay more attention to teaching, by taking a step to better position the university and better position the faculty members for educational excellence. So I believe that excellence in teaching and learning needs to be based on a you know, speaking of the responsibilities of university leadership, on a fulfilled responsibility to establish both reasonable, rigorous expectations of faculty and students for their contributions to this excellence, you know, along the lines that we've spoke before. Yes, it's still up to the faculty and up to the students to make sure that this excellence happens, but also in creating reasonable supportive conditions for this excellence to materialize, which sometimes require major structural repositionings. Now, I'm not advocating that this particular model is a panacea to your situation. But what I'm trying to say is I'm presenting this as an example how we have tried at UBC, from a perspective of academic leaders, take an opportunity to make a direct contribution to enhancing quality of teaching and learning by doing something that faculty couldn't do, students couldn't do. We were in a position to do it, and we tried to make that stance. So let me then very quickly try to summarize what I consider to be the primary responsibilities related to educational excellence of university leaders, right, and of the administration. If one is interested in this model of a balanced university, you know, world-class balanced university. Again, I'll just give you a moment to have a look at those things on a slide. And you know, many of those things are very self-explanatory. Perhaps I'll draw your attention to, you know, to this point here. you know, that's what I was just talking about before. You know, the responsibility for establishing the capacity for educational leadership with consideration of faculty members and students' life and their respective capacities to take on the load, you know, for this responsibility. All right, so let's now turn to the faculty members' side. As I have mentioned earlier, I firmly believe that the responsibility for competent, engaged, and thoughtful teaching rests with each and every member of the professoriate. Whether you are in a traditional professorial stream or you are in a stream that focuses on teaching and educational leadership, doesn't matter. Everyone has the responsibility for competent, engaged, and thoughtful teaching in his or her own context. High level of research engagement should, in my view, never be considered as an excuse for teaching underperformance in one's own classroom, okay? Or an excuse to set mediocre expectations with respect to mentoring graduate students, okay? That's just, in my view, that should never be an excuse. Now, while, oops, I think, wrong way. While it is reasonable, on the other hand, and I would even argue desirable, to adjust the scope and extent of teaching-related duties of those whose careers are to reflect world-class research accomplishment, so, you know, those in the traditional professorial ranks, the commitment to excellence in all pedagogical encounters with students is an obligation which comes with every university professorial appointment. In other words, while the quantity of teaching and, most importantly, the responsibility for other teaching-related duties, roles and functions may reasonably be recalibrated depending on a stream. For example, you know, at UBC, those in the professor of teaching and educational leadership stream teach more than traditional professoriate, and they have very specific and quite significant loads related to educational leadership. You know, curriculum redesign, assessment, you know, practices, work related to online flexible learning and so forth. You know, it's not that suddenly, you know, these people just don't do research and, you know, have a good time. It's just that their roles and responsibilities are completely redesigned, and they teach more. There are no reasons to expect less diligence or less competence in the preparation and delivery of teaching across the streams. Having said this, the university needs to provide an environment that allows professors, in all of the types of appointments, to monitor effectiveness of their teaching and be able to draw on these assessments to inform their practice. Now, this requires credible and consistent mechanisms for the faculty not only to receive systematic feedback on their teaching, but also to have access to support provisions that can help them continually improve in pedagogical practice. Equally important, and this is something that I really need to stress because it was a challenge for us at the time, faculty members need to embrace and take advantage of such provisions. This is another point where the system has to come together and where the responsibility needs to be shared. You know, regretfully, at many universities, and UBC was an example, operate within the entrenched culture of teaching evaluations to be regarded as obtrusive administrative measures, rather than as opportunities for educational improvement. The blame for this culture that disables rather than enables excellence often does not lie just on one side. But the point that I want to make is that we are really, by perpetuating this culture, we are denying ourselves the opportunity to actually do better. So, on the one hand, university leaders are sometimes perhaps too quick to assess, judge, or punish, and doing so even more than, than praise when the praise is warranted, without giving sufficient attention to the quality of instruments maybe used in assessment or the ways in which those struggling in their teaching may effectively be supported. And I'm saying this again, reflecting on our own practice. Sometimes in some contexts there is so much emphasis on administrative purposes of student or peer feedback that we kind of lose the sight of the most valuable aspects of these instruments. However, and very importantly, on the other hand, faculty members are sometimes very dismissive of the value of student feedback, and as much as they value peer feedback for research, with teaching, maybe not so. In extreme cases, faculty may regard formal teaching evaluations as so problematic in the context of labor relations that faculty unions may try to challenge such evaluations in court, which actually I didn't make this up. This is what happened to us. We had our faculty union file a lawsuit against the university. The university won the case, needless to say. But it just tells you about this, the intensity of polarization around something that can really be so incredibly helpful. Now, both of these approaches, the approaches that, polarize, if you will, sides, fail to capitalize on the potential that well-implemented, debriefed, and followed-on teaching evaluations can have on the quality of student learning experience, but also, very importantly, on the professor's satisfaction derived from teaching, because you suddenly are provided with feedback that allows you to do better things that you want to do well, right? And very importantly also on the teaching reputation of the university. And I need to come back to that point because it's not just a philosophical point, it's also an economic point. Teaching excellence creates opportunities for the university in very tangible ways. So let me emphasize that excellence in teaching and learning requires openness to seek regular feedback from all relevant stakeholders involved in the educational process. Thoughtful, consultative development of processes and instruments to enable such feedback to be provided, and the opportunity to meaningfully debrief results of assessments in respectful, supportive, and efficient environments. It requires faculty members to go beyond just reflecting on the feedback and sort of taking it to heart, oh my goodness, I'm now offended that somebody said this or that, or I'm traumatized by this feedback, or, nobody said anything bad, so okay, that means I'm great, right? I think it requires following up in concrete ways on these evaluations, reflecting and then asking a question, okay, so what does this mean for me for the next cycle of teaching? Most of all, it rests on the acknowledgement of the immense privilege, I think, that comes from being positioned to contribute to the education of the students, and a solid resolve to respond to this opportunity with the seriousness, thoughtfulness, and diligence that usually accompany research endeavors. Okay, so it's something that really relates to the mindset with which you approach it. Now, such mindset seriously challenges purely intuitive teaching. I don't know if this is also your experience, but if I've got a penny for every time I talk to a faculty member who just said, oh, I know how to teach. I've been in the good classes, and look, I've been doing it all my life. Well, the fact that you've been doing something all your life doesn't mean you have reached your level of excellence, right? And the fact that the intuition tells you that you are doing well should not be the ultimate assessment of, how well you actually have performed. It calls for respect of the students. We often say, we respect the students, and faculty would say, oh yeah, I respect them through my professional demeanor. I don't insult them. I politely address them. That's not full respect for the students. I think the respect for students is very much manifested in, for example, passion for teaching. If you really want to show respect to the students, how much you you reflect, you prepare, you know, how serious you are about teaching. That's part of this respectful relationship. And it seeks and welcomes advice on how one's teaching may not just meet, but exceed expectations. And it also means setting up your own expectations, not just trying to respond to external expectations of your, you know, peers or administrators. Now, I have also earlier mentioned the importance of scholarly teaching that draws on research insights on how people learn and on evidence of curricular and pedagogical effectiveness in driving educational excellence. And I would like to re-emphasize it now. In a traditional university, when we think about it, with the exceptions probably of the Department of Psychology, maybe cognitive science, maybe some parts of education, there is normally very little access to such knowledge within traditional you know, disciplinary departments. And yet, those are these departments that develop curricula and pedagogies and they implement them, right? So I think in a traditional university, we systemically have failed to create the connection between the knowledge that there is there about how we can really teach very well and how people can learn very well, and the processes and mechanisms in which curricula and pedagogies are established and implemented. You know, it's kind of like this. So this knowledge is here, but it's not being tapped on when we design our teaching and learning processes. And yet when you think about it, you know, no physicist would ever launch a new set of experiments without seriously considering what is known about the phenomena that he or she is exploring, and without consideration of what techniques or strategies have proven successful in advancing work of a similar kind of nature, right? He or she would not just rely on their own intuition or kind of sense of how to do the experiments or how to advance the knowledge. They would very seriously look at what research says about not just what, but how I should be proceeding with my inquiry. Yet with teaching, we have traditionally been limited to the understanding of what works or what doesn't work based on personal experiences or anecdotes contributed by colleagues. I mean, in reality, in disciplinary departments or colleges or faculties, this is what tends to happen. While such approaches, I would argue, have allowed us to kind of get by historically and provide a basic level of educational services to students within this traditional university context, I believe that they are unlikely to lead to continuing excellence in the increasingly competitive contemporary academic world. Clearly, it would be unreasonable to expect that every researcher, every faculty member in every field, in addition to demonstrating his or her you know, disciplinary excellence, would also be competent educational scholar, you know, expert on how people learn, expert on how, you know, how people, what's possible in teaching. However, it would not be unreasonable to expect that all faculty would be open to educational mentorship by peers within the university who are in the same discipline, right? But whose role within the university and a position requires them to invest in the understanding of how teaching and learning works and in supporting others in their teaching. Okay? This again takes us back to that model that I described of kind of bifurcated faculty model, where you now have within your discipline capacity to help inform how teaching and learning in this discipline can be improved without you having to become a scholar in this area. So to summarize the faculty responsibilities, again, I present you with a little list. The first point, again, that's the given for everyone, right? To say, you know, the approach, and again, I'm speaking from experience because I've heard it, you know, within my university and in other places where people say, oh, you know, I'm so good at research, I don't really need to worry about teaching. Well, that's not going to get us to a world-class institution. For your own teaching in your own classroom, to the extent to which you are required to teach, research is not an excuse for slacking off, right? However, on the other hand, the university should recognize that if you are that world-class researcher, you know, life only has so much, time, and you can only contribute so much effort. So you need to be provided with the capacity to be informed on what you need to be informed in order for your teaching to be good. Aspects of work that relate to educational leadership which need to be performed in order to achieve that excellence maybe need to be performed by others, right? The other point that I should here again very much emphasize is this point. It's valuing, being open to, valuing and acting on feedback on your teaching. So that means openness to student evaluations, openness to peer evaluations, and following up on this feedback as diligently as possible. All right, so now my favorite group, the students. So how do students enter this equation? A simple way to answer this question would be to say that student contributions to educational excellence in their own experience and as reflected in university's reputation begins with the recognition that such excellence should not be expected as a gift or a provision by the university, but rather as an asset that needs to be constructed with everyone's involvement. Students often when they arrive, they kind of expect educational product to be provided, forgetting that the quality of that product is actually very much dependent on what they contribute to this process. In other words, I would argue that students hold the key to educational excellence as much as university faculty or university leaders do. Now, having been involved in academia as a student, faculty member, and or university leader for over 35 years now, I have articulated as a student and have heard as a faculty member and as an administrator many student complaints and demands directed at those who teach or those who manage educational enterprise within the university. Now, interestingly, students have been often very observant, very thoughtful, very insightful, and even creative in their identification of the ills of the university and in suggesting possible ways in which the faculty and the university administration could effectively address them. It has not been infrequent in my own professional experience that it was actually student initiative that has helped drive significant improvement in teaching and learning at the university. So I'll give you some examples. So for instance, if you can imagine this, it was the student body at UBC that some decades ago resolved that the university needed to focus more on teaching innovation. And the students have proposed and agreed and passed it through the student referendum, an increase in student tuition by 3%, students voted for it, to create a fund, Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund, for which faculty members could apply for projects that directly contributed to improvement in the classroom. And students will be part of the adjudication process of those proposals. Okay? Now, I do not have time today to discuss all of this kind of student-driven initiatives, but I can tell you that during my time in the provost office, I collaborated very closely with students on several other initiatives that, on their own initiative and their own insistence, actually have generated new opportunities for student learning. Maybe I'll mention just one other one very, very quickly. Students came at some point to me and were saying that, how there is a dissonance in the rhetoric that we say about, undergraduate education being very holistic and kind of allowing them to explore different things, and yet the rigidity of curricula that they are asking, even if they have electives. And there was a point that they were particularly interested in. They were saying, look, we often would like to take one of the electives outside of disciplines that we are really studying, but we are not, we are hesitant to take them because we worry about the grades. you know, if I'm an art major and I take a first-year class in biology where, you know, students are pre-screened for, you know, biology competence, you know, chances are I will not perform as well as that biology student. You know, I'll probably pass, you know, but do I really want to have a C on my transcript, you know, if I want to go to graduate school? No, right? So the students were saying, you know, we are not, you tell us, you know, to explore things, you tell us to do, but you create structures that in reality prevent us from doing so. Okay, so what can we do about it? And, you know, and this notion of a pass-fail course came in, you know, that instead of, you know, that maybe during your education you can take a limited number of those pass-fail courses. And maybe not every course can be taken as pass-fail, but, you know, maybe there are some courses that are more suitable for it than not. And, you know, and maybe that would solve the problems. I said, you know, okay, well, let me think about it. I took it back to sort of the faculty side. And of course, you know, there were people who were saying this is, you know, the world will end if we go that way. But others were saying, well, you know, maybe actually there is something to it. But a big concern was, you know, as a professor, you don't want to have a learning environment where suddenly you have some students who just sort of come and, you know, they're just worried about, you know, merely passing the course, and you know how the whole kind of interaction in a classroom is very different. So we came up together with the students with the idea, well, why won't we then have a pass, D, fail thing? So that created a situation where the students would be motivated to study to at least the level of getting a C, because if they really perform poorly, they'll still end up with a D on the transcript, right? But if they go C, B, or A, it doesn't matter. They just pass, right? So this is an example of an initiative that completely came from the students, seemed reasonable, you know, seemed to be aligned with what the university was trying to encourage. You know, it was a long process, lots of consultation, lots of, you know, figuring out details. But in the end, we've done it. And so again, you know, students can play a very good role in kind of pointing out to these opportunities. However, it has also become apparent to me that by focusing on what the faculty members or what the university or the university administration could do better, students have often missed on the opportunity to improve their learning by asking what they could do themselves to optimize their learning experience. When directly challenged about it, students would often come up with, you know, great and not unexpected answers, such as, you know, they would reckon that it is, well, that they would, for example, say that if they come to class better prepared, you know, their learning tends to be better. Or they would say that, you know, if they spend more time reflecting on the, you know, on what was on assignments, you know, they would perform better. But at the same time, spontaneously, students would not really come up with those kinds of, you know, suggestions. Very few students would spontaneously offer comments on the value, for example, of integrating co-curricular, extracurricular, and curricular activities and trying to make sense out of them to strengthen their learning. They would be expecting somehow that it's the faculty or the university that needs to do it for them. Whereas, you know, we would argue, well, why don't you just do it yourself, right? Or, you know, asking for more rather than less homework in some cases, you know, to reinforce the learning that is being done. Or, for example, thinking about how their own demeanor or preparation for an engagement in class session impacts on quality of teaching and learning, not just for themselves, but for others in the classroom, right? So it's not just for me that I can prepare, but, you know, but learning of others is affected by how I present myself in class. So in other words, there seemed to be a much greater expectation and reliance on the external contributions towards one's own learning than on the realization of the tremendous power, in fact, that each student himself or herself actually holds for making learning meaningful. All right, so one last list. So I would suggest that students' contribution to excellence in teaching and learning can and should continue through their attentiveness to the possibilities that rest within the university and its teaching staff to improve in the university structures, in policies and practices, and, very importantly, through respectful communication of these ideas. You know, that's another thing that sometimes I think students don't optimize on, that they, you know, they create those concerns, grievances, and then they try to blast the university with them, rather than saying, well, how can we be constructive on that feedback? I remember when I worked in the provost office, you know, a lot of my effort was to, you know, to kind of get students on that page and on this framework of saying, look, if you want improvement, you know, what are the constructive ways to ensure that this can happen? So this notion of respectful dialogue, I think it's very, very important. And the other thing that I would often remind them of, and I think it's critically important in terms of what students need to bring into the process, is really the shedding of that I am the educational consumer attitude, you know, and replacing it with a much more active and self-demanding approaches reflective of a greater sense of ownership in one's own learning. So, in conclusion, while I acknowledge that the culture of the university is perhaps among some of the most difficult cultures to change, I'm actually optimistic about the possibility of a balanced university where teaching and learning do thrive alongside ambitious research agenda and are valued and respected as much as scholarship. I also reckon that it is certainly much easier to sketch a design of such an institution and to list responsibilities of various stakeholders than to deliver on such expectations in practice. Now, going back to that sort of list or the attributes of the kinds of things that you know, would be required to efficiently implement a world-class balanced university. As I mentioned earlier, one of the important things is really to change the way in which we think about balancing research and teaching. And go away from that metaphor of a traditional scale to that, if you will, set of digital scales that imply both interdependence but also independence of these two aspects of university mandate. Now, I have not really talked much about this point, but it's a good point, and I want to throw it back at you and sort of I'd be interested what you think. You know, very often, and especially coming from research-intensive university, when I talk to colleagues about teaching and research, you know, people say, oh, there are tremendous synergies between teaching and research, you know. In a research-intensive university, students would do better because, you know, we as researchers are, you know, the rhetoric goes. And I would often pause and say, well, but tell me how. Tell me exactly how. You know, because in rhetoric, yes, if I'm that world-class researcher and I involve students, you know, with my own work and I project all the enthusiasm and all the experience, you know, sure. How often does this happen in a university? Think about first year undergraduate class. You know, that sort of value added of research being done at the university doesn't by default translate to it. So what I would say, we need to problematize that myth. We need to ask ourselves and be really frank and honest in the answer. Are we really better at teaching just because we are research intensive? Or something else needs to happen that relates to the way in which we think about teaching and learning that would allow for that promise of a synergy to occur. And I think you guess on which side of the argument I'm positioned, right? Now, the other thing, and I guess I've been talking about quite a lot, is that as we are thinking about this world-class research-intensive university or world-class university, balanced university, I don't think that we have to, again, go back to the traditional balance between teaching and research, I believe that it is not only possible, but highly advisable, in my view, based on the experience of my university, to continue to monitor and invest in teaching excellence at the same time while lifting the priority for research. Now, again, it may require some adjustments to structures. It may require, very different ways of thinking about things that we've been traditionally conditioned to think in particular ways. But I think it's absolutely possible. And I would argue that doing so is infinitely better than doing what we have done, where we've built something while destroying something else. Not by design, but simply by neglect, I would say. So the point that I'm trying to make is that what we really need is this kind of, as I was talking about the responsibilities of various stakeholders, we need to really bring our minds to thinking about excellence as a systemic issue, as something that is contributed not piece by piece by various stakeholders, but that is really created at the crossings and interactions and interconnections among the actions and intentions and attitudes and behaviors and engagements of various stakeholders. So rather than thinking what the students need to do, what the faculty need to do, what the administrators need to do, we need to think about it. What are the connections between what these groups need to do and what needs to be done within a particular sphere of things where contributions come together from the various stakeholders. So as I have said, high expectations, right? And certainly it is much easier to talk about these ideas than to implement it. However, I think, and it's a thought I want to leave you with, I would argue that we really need to remember that universities attract exceptional people. Universities do not reflect the entire society, okay? The reality is universities attract some of the brightest, some of the smartest, some of the most capable individuals together to come into this environment, right? Attract the highest levels of talent among students, among faculty, among administrators, among academic leaders. So I would argue that what I've been talking about, this world-class balanced university, is therefore not really a utopic idea that I'm kind of trying to, tell you, oh, we should do this, but it's outside of our reach. I think it is within our reach because we are dealing with this exceptional population of individuals who have exceptional capacities to succeed. Therefore, I would just leave you with this UBC motto, which is part of our brand. In Latin, it's tuum est, which means it's up to you. It's really up to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for Anna's speech about how to become a balanced world-class university. Yeah, we have a few minutes for the questions.
Of course.
But before you ask the question, I would like to say a few words about something. Your speech reminded me from several instances that I have experienced in last couple weeks or last couple days. One instance is that I just received my it should be outstanding educators for my service in education for 30 years. I got a medal. So I'm supposed to be a good teacher, right? For my service for 30 years. And the other instance is we had a university council, 校会, yesterday. And we are discussing about the guideline for evaluation teacher, the guideline. And one professor who have done very good in research, and he raised his hand, say, student or the administration should judge us, so shouldn't judge our teaching by student evaluation or student questionnaire, because students are biased. And one representative of the student who raised his hands, or her hands, is a girl. And she said, no, I think the teacher should get our feedback. And we should let university know who didn't teach well, or who teach very well. So that's from the students. And one last instance is yesterday I saw many applications from the professors. They applied for waive of evaluation. Because in this university we used to have, if you got an outstanding award for research, you can waive one evaluation, which we evaluate the faculty for 85 years. But if you got an outstanding research award, you can waive one. So you can evaluate just maybe for 10 years, once for 10 years. But now we offer the opportunity for the professor to apply for waiving the evaluation, because you are doing very good in teaching. So I think we'll try to get a balance in teaching and research. Okay. So now I just share my experience with you, and now we open for the questions. Okay. 各位有没有什么问题？
Sounds like we're trying to be a balanced professor, or trying to have a balanced professorship in our professional life. However, some universities presented some kind of evaluation policies that you can choose a weight of among research, teaching, service, or guidance. Right? Some private universities in Taiwan are doing this. Like you can choose weight, say 100% of evaluation, you can place like 50% in administration up to 70% if you're an administrator. If you're a teacher, up to 40%, something like that. And a minimum for each category, 10 or 20, or say 30 in teaching, 10 in research, 10 in administration or service, and 10 in guidance. All right, so you have choice of weight. What do you think about that? How do you use this? Is it quite balanced?
Sure.
How much percent or how many percent or how much weight?
Yeah. No, so I think what I like about what you're talking about is the notion of realization that, you know, that we can do everything all at once at the total level of excellence, and that there is some way of focusing, if you will, on things. The problem that I have with this model is that, actually there are two problems that I have with this model. One is that as I said before, I firmly believe that it is part of responsibility in every faculty appointment to be excellent in the immediate, you know, interactions, teaching interactions with students, regardless of how much research you do. I would say you probably, if you are a world-class researcher, you may have the load that will reflect that you teach less. So the amount of teaching would be less. But in my view, there is no excuse for slacking off. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I also can accept that some people may do less research or not do research at all, but there is no provision in the way in which I think about it for saying, well, but because I do teaching, you know, like 70% of teaching, 30% of research, therefore that 30% of research that I do will be at a lower level. I mean, that's not how you build world-class excellence, okay? So the difference would be more in the quantitative than qualitative sense, right? From that perspective, it doesn't matter if you are 100% teaching or you are, you know, 20% teaching, you still need a feedback on your teaching to know whether you know, how you can improve, how you can be better within as much of that responsibility as you fulfill. The second issue, and that's actually why we decided to split those ranks, because before we said, well, what about if we just say, well, some people will have more emphasis on teaching and some people will have more of emphasis on research. You know, the problem is that then no one really has a responsibility very explicit for educational leadership. And what happens is you just get people who have more teaching assignments. They are not necessarily becoming any much better teachers because, as I say, we expect everyone to be a good teacher, you know, in the teaching that they do. So we said that, you know, by bifurcating these streams, we by default say that certain people, you know, will have responsibilities primarily for research, teaching, and service, while other people have responsibilities primarily for educational leadership, research, and service, right? Now, within those categories, of course you can balance the loads, and you can say that, you know, even within the traditional professoriate, you can have some people who will be putting a little more effort or time into research, and their teaching load may be less. But again, it's the load, not the level of performance. Okay? The level of performance still needs to reflect world-class excellence if you want to be a world-class institution.
那 UBC 现在可以教学，也可以升等，研究也可以升等。
So we're talking about a world-class balanced university, and as he pointed out, that is from the faculty members' side, you know, balancing teaching. But from the university management side, from the administrators' point of view, they also face the pressure of striving to reach high ranks, world-class international rankings. And you're talking about teaching and research, but a balanced university. But at the same time, we're seeing these world-class international rankings. There is actually an imbalance between research and teaching reflected on the rankings. And you did mention that there is a resurgence of teaching on these rankings. But I may be wrong because I'm not an expert in this field. But I think these indicators are mostly about faculty-student ratio or number of the resources, which may not reflect the quality of excellence you just mentioned. So what are your thoughts, and do you think it's ever possible to reflect the quality and excellence you mentioned in these rankings?
Yeah, no, this is, you know, this is an excellent question, and I think it's a continuing struggle that we have in generally in education or universities with assessment of performance. You know, to put it, you know, in very simple terms, part of the problem is that things that are easy to measure and easy to capture through quantitative indicators are usually or often things that are easy to measure, but sometimes they are very trivial. Things that matter the most and that are the most important, the most critical, are sometimes so complex and so multidimensional that they don't lend themselves to very easy kind of measurement approaches and techniques. And because we live in a world which has, you know, traditionally favorized a particular approaches to evaluation and assessment, yes, there is a bias towards things that can be measured rather than things that really matter. Okay, so I'll put it out as a sort of a part of the reality in which we can live, in which we live. Now, does this matter that it has to be like that, or that nothing is changing? I don't believe so. And when you look at the ways even in which the university rankings are constructed, depending again on what particular one you are looking at, but there is there are other indicators related to excellence, you know, which relate to this diversity of students, for example. You know, which look at employment of the students post-graduation, which look at, you know, other ways related to educational outcomes. than just things like student, faculty ratios. So I think that, I may be an optimist, but I am. I think we will continue to see shifts within those ratings, and I would say that within the game of the ratings, if you will. I mean, clearly research does matter, and I think I've been very, very clear throughout my presentation that research is something that needs to be elevated, and in fact the structures that I've described that we've implemented to help ensure quality of teaching, in fact, support research excellence. It's kind of funny because people say, oh well, now you've enabled these things for excellence in teaching, but guess what? We've also honestly freed more time for people, for researchers to do research. By that, because some of the responsibilities that within this undifferentiated faculty member model, faculty had to still do, that they couldn't often do them as well as they potentially could, but somebody had to do the curriculum redesign from time to time, particularly in professional, accredited programs, because otherwise you'd lose accreditation. So you'd had people who with long faces and and bad moods would be coming to do this job, thinking, oh my goodness, I'm wasting my time, I'm not doing research. Whereas now we have a cadre of people who enthusiastically come and say, wow, fantastically, I can now shine in what I'm supposed to shine, because we we are having that exercise coming up. And one other point that I would say, which again, it kind of seems almost crude, but it's a reality of the educational landscape, is in order to continue to grow in your research, it's not completely independent on the resources that you have as an institution. Okay? I mean, money matters, as much as we don't like to talk about it this way, but it does. One way in which the universities can grow in their capacity to have resources is actually related to educational excellence. That's the simple reality. When you look now at universities in North America, and you look at where their money comes from, for operating budgets, right? You see declining contributions of the public purse. Money that comes from development or fundraising usually is very directed to particular types of things, particular scholarship, maybe endowed chairs, but it's not unrestricted money. And again, depending on the system, in a place like in Canada, we are not funded for research at all. Faculty members bring their research grants, but universities don't get money for research. We get a little bit for indirect costs of research, but it's peanuts, it's not enough. So the reality is we have to somewhere find money to continue to build not just teaching infrastructure, but research infrastructure, right? And guess where the money is coming from? It's coming from international students, coming from professional programs, coming from all the kinds of initiatives that one way or another relate to our educational excellence. So I would say, that in that sort of big game, and how you become excellent, you need resources to become excellent as well. And excellence in education can help that picture a lot. I'm not sure if I answered your question directly, but I hope it helps.
Would you please explain more on consumerism in the campus?
Okay. Now, I think I used the term consumerism when I talked about the sort of students being consumers of educational products, right? You see, again, it's an interesting picture, because there is sort of the reality of certain things and the possibilities of certain things, right? Now, the reality is that I think it's a sort of societal phenomenon, if you will, that education is being seen by many within the society more as certain level of commodity. You kind of, you acquire post-secondary education. It's your ticket towards, better earnings down the road. And that's the reality of it. That's true. I know that academics, many of us in sort of the purest hearts of hearts, you know, we kind of shrug at this idea and say, well, you know, but education is about all those lofty ideas and all of those, you know, great things. And of course it is. But I'm not sure that two perspectives at some level are not totally you know, incompatible. Again, the reality, I think, of circumstance of universities that we need to become more and more entrepreneurial in some ways. Because as I have said, you know, the models of funding that we've relied on for, you know, historically, that there was a public purse that was funding us is simply, you know, we can't reach deep enough into the pocket. So the reality is we need to be entrepreneurial to continue to be able to perform at the level of excellence. But it doesn't mean that we need to bring in this sort of consumerist attitudes into the educational landscape that, again, you know, I'm not going to sort of put here, you know, sort of capitalist or other approaches to thinking about education. But I rather say, you know, what are the things that detract us from excellence or lead us towards excellence? And I think that excessive consumerist attitudes detract us from the potential for excellence. Because if you think about it, you know, as buying something from someone, you expect someone to give you, you know, what you are buying, rather than thinking about what is my role in making sure that that product in the end is as good as it could be. So that's why I've been argued that you know, we have a capacity, and again, it's a cultural kind of shift and a cultural, you know, I think it's a project of driving that cultural change that needs to be very, you know, a conscious effort to help move beyond that sort of strictly consumerist attitude and saying, well, look, in the end, if you come with this approach, you will get out of it much less than if you don't. You know, because you hold a key to make this experience much more wholesome than if you just expect to receive it. So that's in that kind of context I made that reference.
Okay, they have unknown. Yeah, I think it's about 10, right? Yeah. So let's thank you again for another speech.
Thank you.